Rachel Hatfield harbored high hopes for a blissful marriage, but after bearing 3 children, the union came under strain. She fell for another man and sought a divorce from her spouse, a request that was not received well. The situation tragically escalated, and it later emerged that the man's previous wife had perished under highly suspicious circumstances. So, what unfolded within the Winkler family? And was the husband a black widow, preying on his wives? Rachel Hatfield, born into a typical American family, grew up alongside her 3 brothers. Born in California in 1975, she was the second of 4 children born to Don and Diana. However, when Rachel was 10, the family dynamic shifted when her father departed. This stemmed from the mother's brief affair with a neighbor. Regrettably, their marriage ended in divorce. Afterward, Rachel, along with the other children and her mother, relocated to Georgia. She could occasionally visit her father with her siblings, but such interactions were infrequent, and their relationship remained strained. The mother fostered a negative view of the father, who tried unsuccessfully to gain custody of the children. Rachel struggled with the disintegration of her family. She found it difficult to cope with the turmoil surrounding her parents. This led to anorexia in her teenage years. Her weight dropped to a dangerously low 30 kilograms. At one point, her life was at risk. She was hospitalized in a Modesto psychiatric clinic, where she received professional care. She eventually recovered, regained her health, and even started exercising. After her recovery, Rachel began to communicate more with her father. He embraced her despite disagreeing with many of her life decisions. He took pride in her accomplishments, recognizing her intelligence and her role as the only girl in the family. She was a source of inspiration for him. Her academic abilities shone in school, consistently earning high marks. In her adult life, she dedicated herself to her career, aiming to emulate her father's path to success as an impressionist artist, Don Hatfield. During high school, Rachel dated her boyfriend, Tim, who is also an artist. After graduation, they moved in together and faced early challenges. These were the standard financial difficulties encountered by those in their profession before achieving fame and finding their niche. When painting commissions were scarce, they created murals for interior decorating. This proved to be much more profitable, allowing them to afford more comfortable housing. However, the couple believed that this work wouldn't be a lifelong pursuit, even though it worked well for her father. Rachel and Tim, occasionally lacking commissions, decided to seek other options. Simultaneously, Rachel studied at Sonoma University, earning a degree in business and marketing. She excelled in mathematics, which her instructors praised from her first year. Consequently, after graduating with honors, she received a high-paying job offer. She accepted it, but Rachel continued to support her boyfriend, running a business with him. At that time, Tim continued to sell his artwork. It appeared that success was within reach. The couple maintained their relationship for 14 years. Everyone acquainted with them believed in a bright future, marriage, and children. They seemed ideally matched. As Rachel approached 30, she considered starting a family, but Tim was hesitant. He wanted to stabilize their finances first, purchase a home, and establish a solid foundation. Rachel realized she'd have to wait for a while, which she wasn't prepared to do. This caused conflict, and their harmonious relationship began to deteriorate. In July 2005, their relationship was strained. Rachel was invited to a dinner party where she met Todd Winkler. He was 8 years her senior and had already built a career in the U.S. Air Force, where he was a fighter pilot. By the time they met, he held a graduate degree in computer engineering and had a successful online business. He was a wealthy individual with a large house and even his own plane. In addition to his air of success, he was handsome and pleasant to be around. Before Rachel, he had been married twice. His first marriage occurred at a young age, but he later grew disillusioned and divorced. His second wife tragically passed away in a car accident in 1999. The man wanted to try again, so he was looking for the right person. From the very first moments of their meeting, he understood that Rachel was that person. She was also charmed by him and felt reciprocity. They had a pleasant conversation, and it became the beginning of their romance. After that, the girl broke up with her unsuccessful artist and decided to move on. Rachel and Todd were so in love that a couple of weeks after meeting, they started thinking about their future together and children. Less than a month passed when he invited her to a party where there was a plane with a professional pilot who drew the words, "Will you marry me?" in the sky. This skywriting proposal greatly impressed Rachel, and, stunned by the scale, she couldn't refuse. After that, poor artist Tim had no chance to resume his relationship with Rachel, no matter how hard he tried. The girl had time to tell her family and friends that she had fallen in love with the man of her dreams, who had already proposed to her, and she was getting married. That same summer, the couple got married, and they had a luxurious wedding. Rachel took his last name, Winkler. Now the young woman had opportunities she could only dream of. Together, they tried to build a bright future with Todd. Rachel quickly forgot that she had lived with her ex-boyfriend for more than a decade, during which they coped with the lack of money and overcame various difficulties. Many people did not blame her for the breakup since the girl had struggled for years to overcome poverty. Naturally, it was difficult to resist the temptation to get everything you dream of, and she gave in. A year after the wedding, Rachel became pregnant and was incredibly happy. On April 11th, 2007, her daughter Eva was born. Together with her wealthy spouse, they adored their child, but the joyful events did not end there. Another year later, Ariel was born. All this time, Rachel stayed at home and did housework while her husband earned money. In early 2010, serious changes occurred when Todd was offered a managerial position in a prestigious pharmaceutical company. The only problem was that the institution was located 2 hours from his home. He began to stay late at his office in Alameda. During this period, the family lived in an air park, a place for very wealthy people where everyone has a personal garage for a private plane. Rachel got tired of being on maternity leave and got a job as an airport manager, which was nearby. Her husband did not mind and allowed her to work. One day, in September 2009, when her husband was away from home, she met a former Marine named James White, who was doing repair work there, and they began a friendly conversation. At this time, the relationships in the Winkler family began to decline. They no longer felt that strong attachment and attraction to each other that had once allowed them to connect their fates. As Rachel's relatives said, her eyes had dimmed, and she no longer glowed with happiness as before. Her husband, Todd, became aware of their communication, and it upset him that she was spending more time with her colleague than with him. The man began to suspect that Rachel was developing feelings for James. After that, the wealthy man sought advice from his father-in-law named Don, who was religious and supported family values. The relative was extremely opposed to his daughter's behavior. Both men believed that Rachel was inclined towards debauchery and might commit a sin. Rachel's father looked at all this from his perspective, as a similar situation had led his own family to break up and his beloved daughter to a clinic where she was barely saved from anorexia. After that, the father talked to Rachel privately. He thought he could bring her to her senses and save the family. The father explained that he should not have parted with his wife because of her affair. Now, years later, he had reconsidered the situation and believed that he should not have abandoned his wife and children, but should have forgiven her. Because of his stubbornness, they all faced serious difficulties, but in his case, it was impossible to change anything. So he asked his daughter to come to her senses and leave her new lover, and she promised to think about it. However, Rachel, despite her father's advice and the sideways glances of her husband and other people, did not stop communicating with James, with whom she was infatuated. She confessed to her friends that she had fallen for this man. Rachel's husband sensed the danger posed by his rival. He knew what was happening, and his marriage was visibly falling apart. Consequently, he began to contact his wife's father, Don, constantly seeking his advice. He urged Todd to save the marriage. After some time, Rachel realized that her father's words were correct. She understood that she couldn't adequately raise her children on her own, so she made the decision to stay with her wealthy husband. Her father was pleased that she heeded his advice and kept the family together. Her husband, Todd, forgave his wife, and their relationship normalized. A few months later, the couple announced to their friends and relatives that they were expecting their third child. Todd strongly desired a son, an heir to manage his business, but his wife was also content with a third daughter. In March 2011, the couple left their children with Rachel's father, Don, and went on vacation to Florida to further strengthen their relationship. It seemed that things were improving and everything would be fine, as if the Winklers had rekindled their love and were able to maintain it. According to the woman, the baby was her husband's, but some suspected she might have conceived with her lover, James. However, not everything was as harmonious as it seemed within the family. Discord simmered behind the scenes, unseen by the public. After their vacation, they had a major argument, and the family head left for Australia on business. He stayed there for a while. The man even paid for a trip for Rachel's father, Don, but didn't invite his wife and children to visit him. This could have been because a trip to Australia is indeed very long and might have been difficult for the children and the pregnant woman. On the other hand, it might have indicated that there were serious difficulties in their relationship. In Australia, Todd and Don had a great time, relaxing and enjoying themselves almost every evening. While being without her husband for a long time, Rachel sometimes started communicating with her first boyfriend, the artist Tim. She shared stories from her life with him, like a situation with credit cards where her husband had taken out several cards in her name and purchased a plane, essentially in her name. But as a result, she was left with $50,000 in debt. At the same time, the woman noted that this was not a problem for her husband, and he quickly paid off the debt. It seemed she was simply boasting about her wealth. Tim still had feelings for her. It was hard for him to hear all these stories, but the man always held out some hope of being with his former love again. She, on the other hand, simply enjoyed the attention while she was with the children without her husband and was bored. When the youngest child grew up a bit, Rachel decided to pursue her ambitions again, returning to work at the airport and sending the children to kindergarten. Her father, Don, didn't approve of this, as he was religious and believed that a woman should take care of her children at home rather than go to work. Moreover, they were wealthy people, and there was no need to work. But Rachel refused to abandon her favorite occupation, and her husband relented, allowing her to work and socialize. During this period, her former lover, James, started his own business, located not far from Rachel's workplace. Her father asked her not to cross paths with him, so as not to succumb to temptation. He understood that there was clearly more than just friendship between them. James had also been married twice, the second of which had broken down. He was essentially looking for new relationships, just like he once had. However, he didn't want to destroy another family and kept his distance from Rachel. Time passed, and everything resolved itself when, in early June 2010, Rachel called him at his office and said that she was hopelessly in love with him and no longer wanted to live with her husband. This news puzzled James, as both partners were married at the time. Nevertheless, he also still loved Rachel, and they began meeting secretly, forming a kind of love triangle. During this time, Todd was constantly away from home, living in Australia, so there were no obstacles to their meetings. James even developed a relationship with his beloved's children. The lovers found it most challenging to conceal their affair from their neighbors, who sometimes seemed overly conspicuous. Consequently, rumors about their secret romance spread. James, unable to continue concealing the relationship, divorced his wife, revealing his connection with Rachel. Enraged, she disclosed the affair to Todd, who became deeply upset. He called his wife, begging her to end the relationship with her lover for the sake of their marriage and children. If you're interested in this story, Support the video with a like and subscribe to the channel. We have many more such investigations. Enjoy watching. Rachel promised to break up with her lover. However, the meetings with James persisted after that conversation, though they became more clandestine. Meanwhile, in July 2011, the Winklers welcomed their third child, a baby boy. Despite the child being another man's, the lover deeply cherished Rachel. He dreamt of building a life with her and was ready to raise her children. Subsequently, he discovered his wife was still seeing James, a revelation that shocked him. Naturally, Don, Rachel's father, disapproved of his daughter's actions and supported Todd. They frequently spoke on the phone as Todd sought advice from his elder relative. As a result, Rachel's father proposed a meeting between Todd and James, aiming for a calm discussion, and the men agreed. Rachel's father and husband went to the rival's house. His daughter, Caitlin, informed her father when the guests arrived. At that moment, he and his daughter had just finished target practice, so James and his daughter were holding weapons when they saw the guests. According to the lover, the visiting guests seemed highly concerned, their faces showing fear. Nevertheless, there were no shouting matches, fights, or, most importantly, any shooting. The men had a calm conversation. James stated that he was still married to Rachel and loved her, that they had children, and asked him to stay away from his wife. James agreed, but in reality, he did not intend to end the affair. By this time, they truly planned to build a new family and live together. Rachel told James that her husband was creating a domestic tyranny and tormenting her, although there was no evidence to support this. She even labeled her pregnancy with a third child as rape. Naturally, all of this angered James, who wanted to help his lover. Against the backdrop of his feelings, the situation could spiral out of control. The relationship between the Winklers was very strained. In October 2011, Rachel went on a trip to visit her university friends. She planned to spend the weekend with them. She complained to her friends that her husband was not giving her any money. The woman even had to borrow money for baby food. Rachel said that their house was in a state of disrepair. The renovations in the house were still not completed, and her husband did not plan to repair it. She complained that he was controlling and manipulating her. She even allegedly did not want the third child because of his behavior, but the man imposed this decision on her, trying to tie her down with the children. She shared these stories with at least 3 friends. She seemed to be in a difficult position and unsure how to continue raising her children in the context of her collapsing family. One of her university friends was a lawyer. She advised Rachel about the divorce proceedings. At this stage, the woman intended to sort out the family's finances and reach a fair agreement with her husband to separate peacefully and receive her share, as well as resolve the issue of alimony. But he did not agree to a divorce. In November 2011, Rachel stopped making mortgage payments for the house. Her husband was not giving her money and was hiding his income from her. She began to fear that he was planning something against her. On November 11th, the woman called her lawyer friend and announced that she was ready to start divorce proceedings. She chose this moment while her husband was in Amsterdam on a business trip, after which he was going on vacation. After filling out the paperwork, in February 2012, Rachel was ready to file in court. During this time, she told her lover, James, that her husband had found electronic copies of documents on her laptop, after which they disappeared, as he had deleted them. She began filling out the forms by hand to prevent a recurrence. At that time, having learned about the divorce, he wanted to avoid it. The man contacted his wife's father, Don. The father told his father-in-law that his daughter was mentally unstable, which was related to their upcoming divorce. She was smoking and drinking and seemed to be losing weight again. However, at the time, the father saw Rachel constantly and didn't notice any problems. She attributed the weight loss to stress due to the ongoing divorce. The situation in the family had escalated to the limit, and nothing good could come of it. In February 2012, he was in a depressed state, which even his business partner noticed. He suspected that he had mental problems due to the divorce. But the man said that the difficulties were not his, but his wife's. He was thinking of arranging treatment for her in a psychiatric clinic. Allegedly, she was on a binge, and he needed a vacation to cope with all the problems that had arisen. This dialogue took place on February 10th. The divorce proceedings were scheduled to begin on February 26th, 2012. Rachel was counting on a substantial amount of alimony each month for the children's upkeep, which corresponded to her husband's high income. She was going to move in with James and the children and was expecting a meeting in court. However, that evening, she never arrived at her lover's house. The woman ignored all attempts to contact her, even the next day. This was because she was no longer alive. On the morning of the 27th, a neighbor saw Todd with the children, and he seemed to be doing well. Around 10:30 a.m., he temporarily gave his daughters and son to the neighbor, as something terrible had happened in his house. The man was waiting for law enforcement officers to arrive and didn't want his children to witness what was happening. The neighbor noted that he was quite calm. He had no injuries and seemed to be just bustling around. It turned out that morning, he called 911 and reported that 37-year-old Rachel had been killed in their home due to a domestic dispute. Police officers arrived around 10:40 a.m. He came out of the house with his hands up, which were bandaged. He reported that his wife was dead and was in the house. She was found on the floor next to the youngest child's crib. Her husband was arrested and taken to the police station. He agreed to talk to investigators without a lawyer. At the same time, the man was very collected and calm. During the interrogation, he admitted that his wife had a lover whom she had been seeing for a long time behind his back. She had filed for divorce and wanted to obtain full custody of the children. His wife had driven him crazy. A conflict had occurred between them. In a fit of rage, he attacked her, but then heard the child crying and realized that the children might see the quarrel, so he took them to another room. Then he returned, and their heated argument continued. He attacked his wife and hit her in the face, to which she responded with a blow. He began to apologize, realizing that he had done something foolish, but his wife had already come up to him with large scissors in her hands and inflicted several blows on his hands. They began to fight. Todd tried to take the weapon from his wife, but she was in excellent physical shape, and according to Todd, it was difficult for him to cope with her. The man poked Rachel in the eye with his thumb, so he was able to knock the scissors out of her hands. He immediately ran out of the room to gather the children and take them to a safe place. Todd told investigators that he was concerned about his wife's condition and behavior. It seemed to him that she was drunk and could pose a threat to him and the children, so he took them to the neighbor. Upon returning, he found his wife in the bedroom. She was sitting on the floor. He approached her, and she kicked him in the face in a fit of rage and then knocked him to the floor and began to choke him with both hands. Rachel grabbed the scissors again, but he immediately took them away and inflicted several strong blows to her face and neck in self-defense. The woman begged him not to kill her, promising to save the marriage, but he could no longer control his anger. According to him, he forced the scissors into her neck with all his might and continued to press. He admitted that at that moment, he truly wished her dead, but he hadn't planned to kill her. It had happened accidentally. When he realized what had happened, he tried to resuscitate his wife, but she was already dead. After the incident, in a state of shock, he attempted to tidy up the crime scene, washing away the blood, only to realize the futility of it all and dialed 911. Detectives met his account with skepticism. There were numerous inconsistencies in his statement, including the illogical nature of taking the children to a neighbor's house while Rachel passively waited for his return after a fight, and why she didn't use the opportunity to flee. It seemed absurd that Todd had such difficulty overpowering his wife, who was half his size. It was also unclear how he managed to kill her so quickly, considering he dropped the children off at the neighbors at 10:30 and immediately called the police. The medical examiners, after inspecting the victim's body, concluded that she had died 6 hours before his 911 call, completely discrediting his entire narrative. The autopsy revealed multiple injuries on Rachel's body. She had fractured ribs and numerous abrasions covered her entire body. Cuts and stab wounds were primarily on her face and neck, with a fatal, penetrating wound that severed a vein. It took several minutes for Rachel to bleed out and die. Furthermore, numerous defensive wounds and injuries were found on her arms and body, indicating her resistance. She wasn't intoxicated at the time of her death, but had consumed some alcohol. Her blood alcohol level was only slightly above the legal limit for driving in the state. The injuries sustained were indicative of a brutal assault. It was not consistent with self-defense. Detectives investigating the case, after learning about the death of Todd's previous wife, Catherine, became intrigued. Therefore, law enforcement decided to re-examine the demise of Todd's second wife. It was known that she had been the victim of a car accident. The incident was ruled as an accident. However, investigators developed new suspicions. To investigate this, they reviewed their archives. It was a complicated case. It came to light that on the day of Winkler's death, in September 1999, the family went on a camping trip in the woods. There, he was stung by a bee, triggering a severe allergic reaction. He urgently needed medical attention. His wife got behind the wheel of their pickup truck, and he lay down in the back seat before she sped off to the nearest hospital. However, en route, the woman lost control of the vehicle and plunged down a mountain. She died while he survived. He exited the car and set off to find help. Hikers, who were vacationing at the Chattahoochee National Forest in Georgia, came to his call. They helped Todd and called for assistance. According to him, it was due to the adrenaline surge experienced during the crash. All signs of the man's allergic reaction had vanished. The story sounded strange from the outset. When the police arrived at the scene of the accident, the entire area of the incident was engulfed in flames. However, rescuers were unable to descend immediately. Due to the steep slope, special equipment and ropes were required. It was odd how Todd managed to ascend the mountain without any equipment to seek assistance. It was also strange that the weather was hot, yet Todd was wearing warm winter clothing. However, he attributed it all to chills from the fever caused by the sting. During the accident, the man claimed to have been in the vehicle with his wife, yet he had no injuries, not a single scratch. It was difficult to believe, as the accident was very serious. He explained that he was ejected from the pickup truck, and his winter clothing saved him from injury. He could not show the insect bite because he had forgotten it out of fear. Doctors also found no bite mark. Todd believed that his wife was driving too fast, resulting in her loss of control. Catherine Winkler was Todd's previous wife. She and her sister, Christina Carlisle, grew up in a military family. Catherine was a beautiful young woman with a gentle personality, and she was very popular. At the time she met Todd, the 23-year-old woman was already dating another pilot, but Todd managed to charm her. Catherine fell in love with him and was radiant with happiness. She broke up with her boyfriend for him. Like Rachel, Catherine quickly married him. Catherine accompanied him everywhere, joining him on work trips to Japan, Hawaii, and supporting him after a nervous breakdown. They eventually settled in Georgia, where Todd started an internet business. They were together for 8 years when the tragedy occurred in 1999. An autopsy of Catherine's body revealed that the cause of death was asphyxiation from smoke inhalation and thermal burns. Her body was completely charred, making it difficult to determine the cause of death and the injuries sustained. However, the medical examiner found no evidence of foul play. Ultimately, after an investigation, the death of Todd Winkler's second wife, Catherine, was ruled an accident. The man received a life insurance payout of over $1 million following his wife's death. After that, he severed all ties with Catherine's friends and relatives, who suspected him of staging the accident and intentionally killing his wife for financial gain. In their opinion, his story seemed too implausible, and when they learned of Rachel's death, they became even more convinced that Catherine's death was a murder. Just 15 years later, the wealthy businessman found himself in the dock for the murder of his third wife, Rachel. The accused's testimony changed with each interrogation. The same was observed when he testified about the death of his previous wife, Catherine, considering that he had already been involved in a suspicious incident. It was believed that he had planned Rachel's murder long before he carried out the act. At this time, the murdered woman's father, Don, received full custody of the children. He believed that this was a reward for his mistakes, for his family, which he had destroyed when he was young. And now he has a chance to experience all the joys of fatherhood. His daughter went down the same path, and Don received the custody he had dreamed of after separating from his wife, but could not achieve at the time. Rachel's father speculated that Todd had not killed his wife because of her affair, which he had accepted, nor because of the impending divorce, but because she knew his secrets, which she threatened to reveal. Therefore, he silenced her forever. This may be related to the suspicious death of his previous wife or his service in the Air Force, where he had a nervous breakdown after some incident, and therefore Rachel feared him. According to the deceased relatives, he had previously laid hands on her. For example, her brother testified that he had witnessed the defendant assault Rachel in a bar in San Diego in 2006. Rachel herself told her loved ones that if anything bad happened to her, Todd would be the one to blame. The woman felt that he was dangerous. Winkler's eldest daughter recounted an interesting incident in their family. One day, her mother found a box with the ashes of his previous wife in the closet and said, "I hope I never become ashes," to which he replied, "Just never make me angry." At that moment, the girl and her mother felt uneasy about such words. It was established in court that Todd had already tried to harm his wife. When they were on vacation in Florida and scuba diving, he allegedly left her alone in the water at night, after which Rachel barely managed to get to the boat and almost drowned. Later, he tried to throw her off while riding a motorcycle. However, these were unconfirmed stories told by Rachel to her friends, and she liked to embellish the situation. It was established that the defendant had mental disorders. He was diagnosed with dissociative and conversion disorder, which leads to a detachment from reality. Nevertheless, psychiatrists found him sane. The defendant focused on his mental problems, trying to mitigate the sentence. One day during the trial, Todd Winkler even feigned psychosis, but it didn't work. The prosecution argued that the man had committed a premeditated murder. According to the prosecutor, the defendant took scissors and entered the bedroom while his wife was asleep and killed her. Then he had 6 hours to stage a struggle, inflict defensive injuries on himself, bandage them, and remove all unnecessary evidence, gather the children, feed them, and take them to a neighbor. And only after all this did he call 911. There were bloodstains on the children's plates and bottles, which means he was preparing breakfast for them after the bloody massacre of their mother. Later, he confirmed that he did not immediately call the emergency services. The timeline of the events he described did not correspond to reality. According to him, he took the children to the neighbor and only then killed his wife and called for help, but his wife had already been dead for several hours. He also wouldn't have had time to bandage his hands so quickly and meticulously. However, the defense attorney contended that the killing occurred in self-defense and that Rachel was the aggressor. She had first grabbed the scissors and attacked her husband. A struggle ensued. He knew that either she would kill him or he would kill her, and he chose life. The discussion of all the case circumstances and the testimony lasted 13 days. After that, the jury delivered a guilty verdict. They found 47-year-old Todd Winkler guilty of first-degree murder. In December 2014, he was sentenced to 26 years in prison, but in June 2031, he will be eligible for parole. At that time, he will be 64 years old. The murderer repeatedly filed appeals, which were dismissed, but he managed to obtain high standards of accommodation in prison for himself and is comfortably serving his sentence at the San Quentin State Prison, California.